Hey everybody, it's Milton Davis, and we're with 11 Questions tonight. And tonight I'm going to be interviewing Jeff Carroll. I know Jeff from way back. I mean, we go back in the I say in the early days of indie publishing. Met each other online. We've been at a couple of cons together. He's been up here a few times, the Dragon Con and other things. So we've had a really good time, a good chance to hang around with each other. Talk about it and discuss a lot of things. And plus, Jeff is like. Um, he's a man of many talents, and so I hope we'll be able to get into all the things that he's been able to do. So, Jeff, welcome to 11 Questions.
Bless up, Grand. It's too late for Grand Rising, but I'll say it's really blessed to be here. Good to talk to you.
Hey, glad to have you here, man. So we're gonna start off first by reading his bio, and after I read his bio, then we're gonna get into some questions and answers and stuff like that. So, Jeff Carroll pioneered what he calls hip hop horror, sci fi, and fantasy. His stories always have lots of action and a social edge. He has written and produced 6 films and has written over 30 science fiction and nonfiction books and comic books. His short stories have appeared in 3 MV Media anthologies as well as other anthologies. Jeff produces the Monster Panel, a traveling sci fi panel which features writers of color in a lively discussion of comic books, movies, and Black people. His video blog, the Sci Fi Express Lane on YouTube, allows Jeff to share his opinions and thoughts on the world of science fiction and entertainment. And this is a very brief biography, but it doesn't explain everything that Jeff does. So, so hopefully we'll be able to get some more of that out of him as we interview him tonight. So, Jeff, I like to start off with, what brought your imagination into, speculative fiction? Why did you choose to do speculative fiction?
I'm gonna take it back to L.A. Banks, right? L.A. Banks was one of the first science fiction books that I read, where I was reading it to appreciate the science fiction of it. And she was a member of a group of science fiction writers in Philly called the Liars Association, the Liars Club, or something like that. And they embraced that they were liars and that they were, writing stories that's not true. And for me, I go back to my essence is really playing the dozens. Okay.
Yep.
As much as I can try to get away from that, I'm a responder and a topper, right? So you may say something, I'm going to respond and I'm going to do you one better. Okay. So my first writing was, I guess, when I first really tried to become a writer was in the comedy workshop at Uptown Comedy Club in Harlem. And,
Okay.
my classmates was Tracy Morgan, and people in the class before me was Flex Alexander, JB Smoove, Ian Edwards, and of course, all of the people that were in the Brown Brothers family. And we definitely joked a lot. So my first book, that's a science fiction book, is called Thug Angel: Rebirth of a Gargoyle.
Yep.
Now, that is a response. I remember I'm a progressive Black person. I'm I guess a student of Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, James Small, and the like. Right. My professor was Barbara Wheeler, and we used to say Hotep, peace, brother, Hotep, and we still say that. Right. So when I watched Brandon Fraser's The Mummy, and they made Imhotep, who is our multi-genius, who is worshipped as the god Aesculapius in Greek mythology, and made him a demon. I was like, oh, see, that's the problem right there. I have to change that. And so I wrote Thug Angel: Rebirth of a Gargoyle, where they were Egyptian people who learned how to manipulate their bodies and become gargoyles. And the one who orchestrated that was Imhotep. And he made the autumns, which are also called gargoyles. And that was my first book. And now the story is more like Man on Fire, but the mythology of it was a response. And I wanted to make Imhotep a positive person. And
It's
that and that kind of all goes all the way to whatever I'm working on now, like the story that I have in Space Funk, that's a response to seeing the writer John Ringo, who writes for Banned Books, say, I don't write Black people into my stories because gang members don't make good military ops. And I was like, damn, did you just call us all gang members? Oh, we're going to have to work on that. So my Yahoos is a response to John Ringo. In fact, one of the characters, captain's name is John or something like that. I can't remember, but yes, they're military, they're space marines. And I had the African first world type military defeat, I'm telling a story, but confront space marines. And that's a clapback. I'm a clapback writer.
And see, that's interesting because as long as I've known you, I never knew that you were actually doing comedy. I didn't know that. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
I just learned that right now. So I'm like, okay, cool. And I read your first book. I think that was the very first thing I read by you. So, and I know, and that's what I liked about your style. You had a unique style and how you were, to me, I felt like you were doing, you were doing the best effort to kind of incorporate a hip hop style into your writing. Kind of the same way like Minister Faust was doing with his work and stuff,
Mm-mm.
bringing that same kind of vibe to science fiction and fantasy. But I do have a question because I know I read your books, but you make movies, you do films. And
Yes.
were you doing the films before you were doing the writing, or did you do the writing before you did the films?
So my origin story is, like I said, I started seriously taking comedy in the Brown Brothers Uptown Comedy Club workshop. But
Hmm.
I started writing in high school. I used to go to the Apollo Theater Amateur Night and cover Amateur Night every Wednesday my senior year in high school. And then when I went to college, I was just 20 minutes further from New York. So all through my 4 years at college, I worked at the Apollo Theater and writing on Amateur Night and other things. And I progressed into representing talent. So after the comedy club, I'm like, I know all these Black comics. This is like Bill Bellamy was my man. I gave Bill Bellamy his first paid college gig, $300, and we maintained friendship from there. And I started working with other comedians: Monique, Michael Blackson, Mike Epps, Kevin Hart, Dave Chappelle. They all know me. Donnell Rawlins. All these guys. They all know me. My company's Red, Black, and Green Promotions. So I started trying to expand. I took a screenwriting course. I wrote a screenplay called Vamp Five Vamp, A Fraternity of Vampires, and that's what's in what you call it, a Slay book. Um,
Yeah, in Nicole
Nicole Kurtz.
Kersley. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So my first screenplay is a derivative, or the story in Slay is a derivative of my first screenplay. And then I decided, hey, let's expand. So I started booking comedians on radio shows. I don't know if you remember that commercial Sprite where it was like Voltron.
Yeah. Hmm.
I booked comedians on that. That's
Oh,
my
okay.
comedian, Brooklyn Mike. And I was so new, I wasn't getting paid from it. I was more so hooking it up. So I got paid from live performances. And then I started booking comedians in small independent films. And they got booked in films and was telling me, damn, this is trash. The set was somebody's apartment. Or as soon as I came, they said, cut, and my scene was done. All they did was show me coming into the house. So I said, oh man, I'm sending quality acts out to these real low budget things. I said, I can do that. I can do better than garbage. So I made my first film with my comedians, and it's called I'll If I Kill You. 2003, we went into production, and we actually shot it at exterior outside of one of the comedy clubs in New York when we were doing it. And all of that footage is like classic because that comedy club isn't around anymore. But it's where a lot of the New York comedians, so like in the Village, it was a white club and we had a black night there. It was really cool. And my story was based on an experience that I had at Def Comedy Jam. I was an audience producer for Def Comedy Jam. So if you see that, my cousin Tony Carroll, all right, God bless. He's not with us anymore, but we did the tickets, we did the VIP passes, and we sat the audience for that and Def Comedy Jam. And there was a time where Chris Rock hosted, and he said, when Shucky Ducky bombed, he said, Shucky Ducky, whack, whack. And that destroyed Shucky Ducky's career for maybe 10 years or more. And I decided to write a horror story where a comedian gets his career sabotaged or ends, and when he gets teased about it, people start ending up dying in the club. So my comedian's name was Holla Back, and one of the comedians says, Holla Back, Holla Whack, and it's a murder in the comic books. And that's streaming on Tubi. That movie is over 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And then my second movie, Gold Digger Killer, was the one that I had to get off my chest. And that was the first film that I actually entered in film festivals. And it won Best Feature at the first Hip Hop Film Festival.
Okay.
And then it went on and won other awards. So Best New Jersey Filmmaker, Best Horror down here in Miami. And I'm like, wow. So that's how I got started. And it was because of Gold Digger Killer that I hired an illustrator to do a companion comic book to Gold Digger Killer. Mm-hmm. And the first issue was the only one to come out. Second issue right now, I've released it in my graphic novel, Horror Streets, but I'm about to do a Gold Digger Killer mega book, 52-page comic book with the first 2 issues in there. But yeah, that was my start. And actually, All If I Kill You, I didn't enter it in film festivals. It got picked up so fast that we just released it. But I did take it to comic book conventions and horror conventions. And that's what got me into comic books, because I'm showing my movie and I'm meeting other creators. And I was like, you know what? I used to read comic books. Let me get back into this. This was 2004.
So you're already doing what I've been trying to graduate to, is diversifying my content. I mean,
Right.
it sounds like your content is influenced by your personal experiences, which for most authors it is. We try to say we're not, but it's always something there's a kernel of something that happened to us in real life, or something that we experienced that influences a lot of what we write. And I see a lot of authors sometimes, once I got to really know them, and I looked at some of the stories that I read before I got to know them, and I said, okay, now I see where this story is coming from. I know what this was about. A perfect example is once I got to know Charles Saunders, and I read the Amaro books. I had read them before I really got to know him, but after I got to know him, then I could see where Amaro came from, and I can see what gave Amaro its depth, because it's being influenced by a lot of his own personal experiences and stuff like that. So, have you written any novels since that first one we read?
Oh, Thug Angel?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
pretty
so
sure you
I have a trilogy, and I have jumped through different what do you call it, subgenres of horror, right? So after I wrote Thug Angel, and Thug Angel was my second novel. My first novel was Gold Digger Killer, which was
Oh,
the
okay.
novelization of my movie Gold Digger Killer.
So you've taken that through all the process, the movie, the comic book, and the novel.
Yes,
So you got it in
and
all forms. Okay.
yes, and so when I started writing, my Gold Digger Killer is not sci-fi. It's not just a movie, it's urban fiction.
Yeah.
So when I was out there, I was at the Harlem Book Festival. I'm out there with Quan, I'm out there with Treasure Blue, I'm out there with all the urban writers. And those are the writers that I met before I met you guys, because I had nothing, there was no sci-fi. It was when I decided to write the next book, I said, I don't have to write a story that I can afford to shoot. When you write a book, you can write with any budget in mind.
Yeah.
And so I said, oh, I'm writing Thug Angel, and he's fighting gigantic alligator under the street, the subway system in New York. He's flying all around. So I'm going, I can never shoot this stuff. And then my next book was it happened on Negro Mountain, and
Yeah.
that was
Yep.
a screenplay that I had wrote. and
Mm-hmm.
I adapted that to a novel, and that was beautiful. It was a real horror. It was scarier than I ever really wanted it to be. I mean, ever that I don't want to write that much anymore because I had nightmares writing it. But it was also my first publishing deal. It's still with the same publisher out of um, California. Um, gosh, make me forget the name. Black Black something. Oh God. Anyway, but it's a horror. Nicholas Gaboski. He'll hate me, but it's God, it escaped me. But that was my third book, and then I wanted to do more subgenre stuff. So I did a book of short stories called Sci-Fi Streets,
Yep. I
and
know
in
that.
there
Yep.
I had a story called The Programmable Man, and
Yep.
Programmable Man is the one that really brought me into the Atlanta world because Vala Jean really liked that. And
Yeah.
she republished that in her um, erotic sci-fi book.
Yeah. I remember
And
that.
that
Mm-hmm.
and people started recognizing my name from there. And then I also had a story in there called Interview with a Monster. And that was my horror character, Baba. And that became the star of my third movie. I even did some comic book pages of his origin story to put in the movie. And then Baba went on and did Conjuring Baba, and then I did The Black Nun. And those three movies, Baba's in. So Baba has like a trilogy, but he started in Sci-Fi Streets in my short stories.
Mm-hmm.
John Jennings did a tribute cover poster for Baba, and that's the character that I cosplay. So when you did Black Tasticon,
Mm-hmm.
I was cosplaying Baba.
Yep. Yep.
And so then I wanted to write zombie because at the time, you did Sisters of the, what was it?
Sisters of the Spear. Griot Sisters of the
Spear,
Spear.
right. Sister Spear, and I was late. So I didn't get in that. But Balajoon got my story in his anthology. And I started saying, we need to do it. I got high on Black Sci-Fi. So I said, we need to do all of the subgenres. When are you going to come out with a post-apocalypse? When are you going to come out with a zombie? And I said, let me write these stories. So I wrote Rashida the Zombie Killer. And that is probably my most hip-hop sci-fi book. That is an Egyptian musical device that almost, you ever seen tuning forks?
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
so and when they put stones on your back,
Yeah.
those all dealing with chakras and density and stuff like that. So I came up with a musical device that plays on all of that, and it works to bring you cure Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis. But played wrong, it can turn you into a zombie. And
Okay.
so they come up with a record where they put that behind it, and a bitter rapper makes a record that turns people into zombies, and he calls it the Death Jam. Uh, so that's what she the Zombie Killer. I'm destroying all of New York City. I love it. Um, then I did, this is probably out of order, but I also did Welcome to Boss Lady's Planet,
Yeah.
and that is my space story. That is my next universe. If I go to after this, I want to write. And then I did the Harlem Shake, and the
Yeah.
Harlem Shake is it could be called Black Earthquake, but I wrote a story that um, kind of I started mixing in real stuff. I did a Negro Mountain is a real place, but is there's not affecting anybody. But
Yeah.
having worked at the Apollo Theater and never heard of a fault line right on 125th Street was blew my mind. So when I found out about the fault line, I realized learned that they relocated Black people from Seneca Village and Central Park to 125th Street, and it was all because they found this fault line. So I was like, damn, they moved us to cheap real estate, but we made it historic.
Yeah.
Harlem is one of the most popular cities and sections in New York because of us. And so destroying it was a pleasure. When I had my company, Red, Black, and Green Promotions, we used to do Harlem tours. So I knew all of the historical sites in Harlem, and each part of Harlem, I had a story told about the disaster earthquake. So you'll see Strivers Road, you'll see the Liberation Bookstore, you'll see City College, of course, the Apollo Theater, all of these, Lenox Lounge, all these, the Polo Grounds basketball court where the Rucker is played. All those, I'm destroying it. But it's like my love letter to Harlem. And then I wrote a sequel called Survivor's Peak, and then I wrote Escape from Everywhere, which are two sequels to follow Harlem Shake. And Escape from Everywhere is my last published book. I have two books that I haven't put out yet, my second-hand collection of short stories. But in Survivor's Peak, we see all these movies like Paradise, Silo. What was the other one? Um, Video game or whatever, where they all in these bunkers. So in Survivor's Peak, the people survived the earthquake by being taken into a bunker. And it's a group of Black survivalists. And so they become the stars of my story because I wanted to show how they could live in the post-apocalypse. So they had to have some training, and there were people preparing for an earthquake or a disaster or type of event before the event, and those people had a bunker, a big bunker with all Black people in it. And so that's my story. And Survivor's Peak and Escape from Everywhere. And then that's where I got The Last Harlemite, which is my first comic book series published in stores that came out August and ran through August to November.
Okay. So I would say that New York, specifically Harlem has a big influence on your writing. That's
Sometimes it's like you. It's like, what's your book, Palmetto?
yeah, talking about Palmetto Christmas and Muscadine Rhyme.
Yes, right. You write with through your experiences, and I felt that like Harlem and New York were places that I knew,
Hmm.
and I was like, I didn't, like I said, I didn't want to call it Black Earthquake, but I wrote there. But before that, I wrote a fictitious place in Thug Angel called Front Street Projects that doesn't exist. And I went to Negro Mountain, and there's no city like that in Negro Mountain. In fact,
Yeah,
I've never been there, you know.
yeah.
But yes, you want to do those things. So that's where I'm at.
So let's talk a little bit about in general. Let's get a little less specific. I mean, I love
Okay.
that you ran all these titles down, and I hope people were taking notes so they can make sure and go look at your work and see what you're doing. Um, how would you explain? How would you talk about your journey? Because like I said, we both met early on, probably like what 2010, 2011, that back in
Yeah, I think it was Megaverse.
yeah, stuff like that. But how would you explain or talk about describe your journey as a speculative fiction author from that point up to now? I mean, what have been some of the high points, the low points? So what would you say about it in general? Because we know we were having a little conversation about um, the area that you're in, but how would you talk about it in general? What would you say about it in general?
So when I look at my writing, um, I will say that I feel, and I felt like it before, you try to write what's not being written at the time. And sometimes you can go too far. However, in time will catch up to where you are. And many times they call that being ahead of the time.
Hmm.
And I look at my books, Rashida Zombie Killer, Welcome to Boss Ladies Planet, even Harlem Shake. I feel like I was ahead of the time at the time that those books came out. But
Okay.
now they are appropriate. There's a lot of people with titles like that. When I came out with Thug Angel, yes, it's a gargoyle, paranormal character. There was not a lot of, like we said, space stories.
Hmm.
Now we have that. So I don't know. I think I'm happy where we are now. I've had my run. Shout out to Red Five Comics, and the last Harlemite came out. I finished my fourth book on my Kickstarter, Planet of Kibalon. Fourth book is coming. It's already been out digital. I'm just waiting on the printing to work out. But that's a milestone. Um, I did The Black Nun, was like my last movie, and I brought the Black Nun into my comic book universe. So in Fingernails, they're watching the Black Nun, and the character that's I play in the Black Nun is a real character in my comic book. So I'm writing myself, and that's so beautiful. So I think where I'm at right now is at the highest point in my career. Um, I think for what I write and what I like to write, Space Funk is my capstone. It is. I joke around and say, but I think we're going to win a Hugo Award. I don't know. We may get nominated, but I don't think there's anything better than what we did because um, we show what we would write about if we were given the opportunity to write about it. In terms of what would we write about space, and we're not writing any negative stuff on other ethnicities. All of the stuff that I've heard that people wrote in the book are just pro black, pro human, pro earth stuff. And that ain't hurting nobody. But we couldn't get, there was gatekeepers. Who's gonna read this? It's gonna be Black Panthers in space, and we weren't, So
Yeah,
that's the beautiful thing.
yeah. All of the funk anthologies have been, you know, overall positive experiences. At the same time, I like the fact that we have allowed, I'm not going to say allowed, but we've had authors who have been able to express themselves in ways that they wouldn't have been able to express in other publishers, either because other publishers would have been too timid, or they would have been. Sometimes people say they're looking for something black, but they're not really looking for something black, And I mean, there's a difference between diversity and black, you know, and they all have their place. And the reason I bring that up was because when we let the first steampunk out,
Right.
there was a story in steampunk that a particular editor, well-known editor, looked at, and after they read the book, they felt like that should have been the story that should have led the book, you know, and that was because that was a story of what they felt steampunk should have been. And
Mm,
what I told them was that steampunk wasn't what was in that story what was an aspect of what steampunk is. It was one view, and as we are, like we said, we're not a monolith. I think every funk anthology expresses that because you got different people from different cultures talking about a particular genre in the way that they want to talk about it.
right.
And there are going to be some things that are going to be very inclusive and diverse, and there are going to be some things that are going to be, like I say, there's some stories in these books that the main characters happen to be black, and there are other stories in these books where the main characters have to be black.
Right.
And I think that's the thing behind all the funk anthologies. And Space Funk is another example of that. Your story in particular, Here Come the Yahoos. I know that there's a character in that story that is in some of your other stories, the Twa Man. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So, and I'm wondering why you decided to bring the Twa Man to this particular party.
you know, I, first of all, let me just say I was torn, okay, because I wanted to put another story in Space Funk, and the other story was rejected by a black editor, and I was like, oh, I know it's hot, and I wanted to put it in Space Funk, and I was like, I know it'll stand out, but it wasn't as spacey-ish as Here Come the Yahoos, right?
Mhm.
Here Come the Yahoos is speaks to my universe. I create a universe. I have named planets. I have a villain that's going on. And Here Come the Yahoos speaks to that. I was heavily influenced by um, Endgame and Infinity Wars in Marvel Universe. So
Mhm.
I did something very similar. I was also very frustrated with Avatar, the sequel to Avatar. And I wanted to write what I thought Avatar should be. I'm ready for them people to leave the planet Pandora and have a universe, but that's me. James Cameron is keeping it very terrestrial and it's all about Pandora. No, I'm like, nah, dude. If we are people of color, 9/10 of the Earth's population, then in space, we can't be 9%. We should be, it shouldn't be pro-Black to see a mirror reflection of the diversity on Earth in the universe. That's not pro-Black because I'm not saying everybody's African. I'm saying there's room for Asians, there's room for Indians or whatever, and white people. But I'm saying if you come back to me with a Star Wars or a Star Trek, then that's to me unrealistic. And so the Twa Man is my Doctor Strange, and he's my space traveling person. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to my story in Space Funk doesn't take place on Earth.
Yeah,
he's the connection to Earth.
Okay.
So that's the difference. And however, the connection to Earth, if not go full Billy Carson with it, but I did take like conspiracy theorists and a lot of these Anunnaki, type speakers, the Nephilim, the ones that they get from the Bible, the ones they get from Mesopotamia, and this that type of writing. I did take a little bit of that, because I was like, let me name my planets. So there's a little bit of that energy in there where the people who are on the planets in my universe have been to Earth before. Some of them are the pioneers of Earth. So I have the Earth fits into it, but I'm not Earth first, the world second, universe second. Earth fits into the universe.
Okay, that's cool. Don't give away too much now because we want people.
No, but that's my universe.
So I'm getting back to the movie thing in a way.
Yes.
I'm looking at what the technology that we see now. Some of the things that are making it much easier to make films. And when you think about when you were making films, 10, 15 years ago, making movies, and you're still making them now. What do you see? What do you see in the present and the future in that whole field right now? Do you see yourself still making movies, but now having it being easier because of the technology, or how do you see it now? I mean, do you still see Hollywood as the ultimate goal, or how do you view making movies now?
Well, I was never a Hollywood person. Let's knock that out.
Okay.
I'm from New York. New York is in Hollywood. It's many independent films in New York, and I worked in independent film. So I already saw the diversity. However, you want to hit a home run. It's beautiful to have these mega things. Sometimes I think, should I have gone to California? But I learned to make film in New York, and I made my first film while I lived in Florida. Okay. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, yeah, technology has made a lot of things easier. My first film script, I had to mail the screenplay to the director. That is amazingly risky, and he mailed back the notes. Okay. Email was available, but it wasn't as easy as it is now. Now we can get an email on our phone. You can read a script. My first table read, we had to, not the first few table reads, we had to print out. I still got binders in my office for when I'm going to do table reads. And I have to tell myself, the last 3 movies, everybody was reading from their phones. They had all of their sides on their phones. They didn't have to have that. What else? I'm paying by PayPal. So I'm like, yo, what's your PayPal? Okay, here's your payment for today. You understand? My first couple of movies, I had cut checks. Now I'm paying by PayPal. I might do Zelle next time. I might have a QR code and just hold the phone up and you get paid. So my first film, the directors and the editors was all one team. second movie, I had lost the editor, and I ended up having to get another editor. And the first editor lost the whole scene from the movie. I'm
Wow.
like, oh, and low budget, we ain't got time. We don't have. Once it's shot, I shot in 7 days. We in and out, you know.
Mhm.
So now my documentary that I have just pulled off the Comic Con circuit, and I'm about to find a distribution deal for, is I edited myself. I went on in quarantine, hunkered in. I was in my bunker, whatever, and I learned how to edit. And mind you, it may not be no Hollywood editing, but it's good enough for me. And I learned so much more that even if I have to hire an editor, I am able to be more aware of who I'm asking to. And I probably will not just take a technical editor. I may take an editor with a creative angle. You know, an art.
Mhm.
I may select them more artistically than
Yeah.
as technically as I used to. Cameras have changed. I shot my film on my cell phone. You know, many of the scenes, it was really inconspicuous. I didn't have to get permits. I got a little tripod I set up. I shot in Barnes and Noble. I shot in the AMC movie theater. No logos is seen. You won't know it's Barnes and Noble. You won't know it's AMC. But if I'd had to break out a camera with lights, it'd have been, what are you doing? Get out of here. So I was able to do that. What else? Screenwriting. I I use AI to edit my first drafts of my books. I use AI Grammarly to edit my comic scripts and my movie script. So in the production first end, I do it. So there's is so much that in a filmmaking process, on down to locations, on down to um, before I even get to AI digital stuff or AI characters or AI voices. I'm not even using any of that. I'm talking about the technology from 2002, 2003 when I made the first film. You know what I'm saying? Just being able to put it on YouTube, right?
Mhm.
Just to be able to put the trailer, the marketing, you know what I'm saying, is so much easier. My first two films, I had to carry DVDs of the trailer. My second movie got bootlegged because I was giving out, and my friend said, "Oh, they're showing a movie in a nightclub in Philadelphia. The bar, you know, the watermark at the bottom. I don't have to worry about that now the way I did before because I can put it private on YouTube. I can take it off. I can just put it up whoever I want to see it. I don't have to fly across the country to get a distribution deal, although I did. I don't have to do that as much as I had to before. And those are amazing cost cutters. You know, traveling hotel, like going to these I went to Slam Dance and Sundance Film Festival 2 years. That's not cheap. I don't have to do that anymore. So
It sounds like this is a brave new world for you right now doing movie
yeah, I
stuff.
mean, I just had a meeting earlier this afternoon, and one of my guys who worked on like three of my films, he was like, "All right, I'm going to get the financing now. We need to go and do it. We're going to do it this summer." So you never know. Film is not like writing a book.
Yeah,
Film is you have to wait for everything to line up.
yeah.
Pre-production could be 2, 3 years. The production might be a month, but with a book, you're like, I got an idea, I'll start writing it tomorrow.
Yep, that's true. That's true.
It'll be out next week.
True. That is true. Well, man, I could talk to you for 2 hours.
I appreciate that.
You know, but trying to keep in with the thing we're doing here. But yeah, but um, just from I'm happy to get the opportunity to introduce people to you who don't know about you, and I'm happy to have the opportunity for people who know you to hear you talk about what we've been talking about today and bring some insight. Like I said, you brought something I had never heard you talked about the comedy part before, so that was something that was eye opening to me. But what should we be looking for from you say in the near future? You got any books coming out? I know you talked about them during the conversation and stuff like that. What do you got going on for like the
Okay.
rest of this year?
So there's like a couple of things. Most like film, I don't know. I have a deal that I signed last year. I almost sign deals every year for my film. So it's nothing until it happens. It won't happen.
Yeah.
But I have a collection of short stories. My logo, I love sci-fi.
Mhm.
That's the title of it, and I want to start marketing the shirts a little bit more. This logo, mugs, whatever. I want to get that out. So my documentary is called "Why I Love Sci-Fi," and I want to get that out. So I'm going to be working towards that. And then comic book wise, my comic books are all coming to graphic novels. The Harlemite, the 4 issues. Once we sell out of those 4 floppy issues, we're going graphic novel, and that should happen by the end of the year, if not next year. Planet Keebalon, that's self-owned, so I just finished the 4th book. This summer, I should have the graphic novel, and then I have a couple of other little ones. I have Space Streets, and I have Spoof Streets or Humor Streets, and I don't really know, but I'm spoofing Medea. I'm spoofing Kyrie Irving and the Flat Earth. I'm spoofing Nick Cannon and Wilding Out Zombies. So I have a lot of little things in there, and those will be out this year.
Okay.
Those will be out. So I have some little comic book stuff, and then I have, my documentary and a book, short stories coming out.
So when we want to get all this stuff, where do we find you? Where do people go to find Jeff Carroll?
Well, I have social media presence. I have an Amazon bookstore. I do not have a website yet. I had one when I was doing comedy, but the transition really wasn't working. I had to shut that down to be more recognized as a writer. Because I represent like big name comics, and I look small to compared to them. So I had to get that side and build a new identity. So I don't have a website yet, but all my books are on Amazon, even the comic books. And then for the film, yeah, Google the title because streaming platforms rotate. So all I can say is like the Black Nun may be on Tubi this month, but the next month it may be on Vimeo. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Well,
So
what's your Instagram?
my Instagram is Coach Yo Jeff at IG, Coach Yo Jeff.
Okay. Let me.
And that's pretty much on everything. Or you can Google Jeff Carroll or any of my titles. They all bring it back to me.
Okay, that's what I wanted to. That's what I wanted to find out, so people
Yeah,
know how to
yeah,
find
no
you.
problem.
And so when they see these movies on Tubi and other places, they can tag you and holler at you and say, "Hey, yo, man, I saw you was up on Tubi, man." That kind of stuff.
I appreciate it.
So, but Jeff, like I said, it was great having you here, man. I love your energy. I love your ideals, your imagination. I feel like you're one of the truly unique creators out here in this industry and stuff. You have a unique way of coming at things, and it's always fresh and interesting. And glad to have the opportunity to let everybody see what you're up to. You and me, we're gonna be chopping it up down the road later on. So, but everybody, I hope y'all enjoyed talking to Jeff. Jeff is a man,
Thank you very much.
and hope y'all
I
enjoy
can't.
the. Go ahead.
I
Go ahead.
haven't gotten my copy of Space Funk yet, but
It's
I can't.
coming.
I'm gonna read every. No rush. I'm reading every story, and this is like the best anthology. I was in City. I was in Spy Funk. This right here, the apex, baby.
Well, I'm glad you think. I mean, it is great. I mean, I'm not gonna push it too much because this is your spotlight. This is about you.
Oh
But yeah,
yeah, but
but you're gonna
we in
enjoy
it
it, though.
together. Yeah,
Yeah, you're gonna.
I'm really happy to be a part of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but I'm glad you're a part of it too, and having everybody in here to make this book what it is going to be something else. But like I said, thank you, Jeff, for coming. Had a great time. Thank y'all for tuning in to 11 Questions. Until we come back again, and we'll have a little information at the end of it, so y'all can follow Jeff and continue to follow the series as well. So that's it for now. So y'all take care. Peace.
Oh.